There's something I've wanted to do for years, but every time I try it, my body will shut down. And that's speaking Spanish.
Fiesta, salsa, quinceañera, baila, siente ritmo, ponte a sonreír, ven conmigo.
And let me get this out of the way right out of the gate. I love my culture. I love the tradition. I love the history. I love the music. I love the food. I love that sense of family and community and support. I love being a Latin woman. I grew up around so many amazing aspects of my Latin culture, and I've always felt deeply connected to them. But the language is always something that's intimidated me, which is kind of ironic because I'm a first-generation Cuban-American. I grew up around native speakers. I have desperately wanted to master Spanish for my entire life, but every time I start to pluck up the courage to do so, something invisible pulls me back. And at first I thought it was something to do with the language, but at the end of the day, I really don't think that's what it is. I think this is more about shame. And shame is a sneaky little devil because it'll weave its way into your life and slowly convince you that parts of your identity don't actually belong to you. So this is a story about me and my ever-evolving relationship with the Spanish language and what that's taught me about slowly reclaiming the parts of yourself that someone convinced you weren't enough for. Hey guys, it's Gata and welcome to my channel. This is my corner of the internet where I like to talk about feminine psychology and the patterns that help us move through the world and get good with ourselves. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in exploring further, I invite you to pull up a chair and join the conversation. I'd love to have you. So a little bit of background information for you. My dad was born in Cuba and came to the United States during his early childhood. Yada, 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 he grows up, goes to college, meets my mom, and the rest is history. Like so many immigrants from Latin America, my dad is extremely proud of his Cuban roots. And to his credit, he really did try to embed the culture into our everyday lives. He would buy us bilingual children's books, and he would always make us watch the Telemundo dubs of our favorite TV shows. But my parents split up when I was young, and my dad moved to a different town, and so he wasn't around anymore to expose me to the language. And so, like so many kids who are exposed to a second or third language at home, I started going to school where English was predominantly spoken, and I really quickly lost that foundation that he built. Now, even though my parents were split up, I would still see my dad, especially around like holidays and major family events. And so I got a heavy dose of my Cuban culture during those times. During Bad Bunny's Super Bowl halftime show, seeing those little babies sleeping on a chair in the middle of a family party, I felt so seen because that really was my experience growing up in a Latin household. So I got my cultural education and I have always loved that part of who I am. Felt such a deep connection with those roots. I mean, look at my name. That is a Latin ass name. But during these family parties where we were having fun and enjoying each other's company, one question would always come up and kill the vibe for me and my younger brother. Ay, Gata, why you no speak Spanish? Every time, without fail. And I can still remember the shame that would wash over me in those moments. My face would get red and my heart would start beating really quickly, and I would feel like I was being put on the spot, like I was being tested on information that I didn't know the answer to. And I don't think this is a problem just in my family. I think this is a deeper, more pervasive issue in Latin cultures around the world. Anyone who comes from a Latin background, I would love to know your experience with this if you want to share down below. And I want to be very clear that I recognize as an adult that it wasn't my family's intention to shame me or make me feel bad. On the contrary, I think they were trying to shame my dad for not teaching us. But that's not what I heard as a kid. And more importantly, that's not the way my body felt, because I felt like I'd done something wrong, like I was failing somehow. And failing at something that I cared so deeply about, my culture and my roots and my family. And I didn't realize at the time just how deeply I was internalizing that message. And that shame became baggage that I hoisted on my shoulders and have continued to carry with me into my adulthood.
You have to say backpack. Say backpack, say backpack.
And here's the funny part of all of this. I actually know a lot more Spanish than I give myself credit for. Yes, my parents split up when I was pretty young, but I was getting daily immersion in the language up until that point. I understand way more than I speak. I have a pretty solid vocabulary and I can form simple sentences. I learned Spanish until I was a late toddler, so I speak Spanish like a late toddler. Looking at that objectively, I have the foundation that I need. I don't think it would actually take me that long to get to a conversational level. Skill-wise, yes, I'm ready to go, but emotionally is a completely different story. And that internal friction is getting more and more uncomfortable the older I get, because the desire to learn language is there and always has been. But the fear that I have to put myself out there and be vulnerable and try gets deeper and deeper too. And here's the thing, over the years, I really have tried all the things to try and make this click for me. I am surrounded, not just in my family, but by plenty of friends who speak Spanish fluently. I know they practice with me if I ask them to. I've done Babbel, I've tried reading books, I've listened to podcasts and stories in Spanish. I know that I can do this, but there's this mental block that feels like it's in my way every single time. And that's when I realized that this isn't about learning Spanish at all. It's about finally believing that I'm worthy to give it a try before I'm perfect at it. It's about identity and taking ownership of who I am, regardless of what anyone else thinks about that. In this day and age, I think it's more important than ever for Latino people to stand up and be proud of who they are. And I don't need anyone trying to convince me that because I don't speak the language, that I'm any less proud of my roots than they are. But that's the block in my mind, right? And I think this goes so far beyond culture. I think that we all have parts of ourselves that get frozen in time. For me, it just so happens to be Spanish, but for you, it could be something else. Something that used to bring you joy and love. Something that made you feel connected, that suddenly you convinced yourself isn't actually yours. Perhaps you used to love painting, but one person's harsh opinion made you put down a brush and never look at a canvas again. Maybe you're a writer who shared a piece of work before you were really ready to and got burned in the process. Maybe there's a dream job you've always wanted to have, but along the way, someone's convinced you that you could never do that. This isn't about blaming other people for where we end up in life. It's about recognizing within ourselves those little voices that hold us back without us even knowing it. Where along the way did you pick up this idea that people like me don't do that? Or I don't want to be cringe or embarrassing by putting myself out there? When did you start to believe I'm unworthy of giving it a shot? For a long time, I looked at Spanish as something that I was missing, this mark on my character, this place in my life where I'd fallen short or I dropped the ball. I feel like so many people who have been through experiences like this know what it's like when that shame starts eating away at you and it turns into guilt. And then you get into this spiral that's really hard to get yourself out of. What did it for me was becoming a mom. Because now when I think about learning Spanish, I don't just think about myself or my family or even my culture. I think about my kid. I think about the way that I want her to be connected to her heritage, to her roots, to the people that came before her. I want her to be able to speak to her older family members with confidence and to be connected to a larger global community through this beautiful language. I also want her to have a deeper appreciation for the music and the history and the food. And I know that I can recreate that for her, like my parents did for me. But I know from experience that without the language, something about it just feels a little incomplete. I don't want to just pass down the culture. I want to pass down the confidence to claim it for yourself. This is something I want to do. It's something I've always wanted. And I've gotten to a point in my life where I'm so tired of letting fear and other people's past judgments stop me from going after something that I really, really want, something that's mine. And so that's got to start with me. So these are the things that I'm doing to slowly nudge myself out of my comfort zone and take back ownership of what belongs to me. And these little tips are helpful no matter what emotional block you're trying to jump over. It could be learning a new language, but it could also be acquiring a new skill or applying for a new job. Here's how you can slowly start to stretch yourself to those uncomfortable places without feeling like you're falling apart. The first thing is becoming a quiet observer of my life. I'm a huge believer in the power of a regulated nervous system, and I think that pretty much anything that you want to accomplish in life starts from that solid foundation. And based on what I've shared just in this video, you can probably see that when it comes to Spanish, my nervous system is very dysregulated. So I have to slowly fix that first. So when I'm listening to a podcast or I'm doing a Babbel lesson, and all of a sudden that little hint of insecurity starts creeping back up, I pause and I don't judge. I just observe it. I try to take a step back and think, what about that exercise? What about that conversation sparked this feeling in me? We're not trying to fix anything right now. This is really just about recognizing what triggers that sense of unworthiness within you. Because once you recognize what those triggers are, you can gently start moving the needle in the direction that you want it to go. I also really believe in the power of naming an emotion. When you feel a dark feeling creeping into your spirit, it feels like this boogeyman lurking in the back of your mind. But when you can recognize it and name it, you take its power away. Kind of like Rumpelstiltskin. Suddenly it's not, oh, I feel bad every time I try speaking to my grandfather in Spanish. It's, oh, I feel insecure when I don't feel like I'm speaking perfectly every time. Those are two very different mindsets. The second thing that I'm doing as I'm moving through this fluency journey is maintaining the 70% principle. When I feel 70% ready to do something, I have to act. This is something that is generally kind of tricky for me in my life. For a long time, I feel like I always waited to act until I felt ready to do so. And it wasn't until I learned this truth that everything switched for me. The fact is, you rarely will feel 100% ready for anything in your life. If something's big or important or meaningful, it's gonna stretch you, it's gonna challenge you, it's gonna force you out of what's familiar. But like I mentioned before, that nervous system component is really important. You need to feel capable, at least a little bit, in order for any of this to stick. Notice, I didn't say 90%. I didn't even say 80%. I said 70. C's get degrees in the school of life. Because here's the thing, someone who shows up every time they feel 70% ready is often gonna get farther in life. And that's because the person who's not afraid to jump into something before they feel 100% is going to be putting themselves out there more. This is one of those threads that I've seen with some of the world's most successful people. If perfection is the thing that's stopping you from trying in the first place, then what's the point of that standard? Seriously, no one achieves perfection without falling on their face a couple of times first. And this Spanish speaking thing is a really tender wound for me, and so I'm trying to tread lightly and give myself a lot of grace in the process. And this is your permission to do the same thing for yourself. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all of the answers, and you certainly don't have to get it right all the time. You just need to try. I think one of the biggest challenges to people going after the things that they really want is the fear of failure. And so along my journey, I'm going to be microdosing vulnerability. This is what I mean. My abuelo, even in his old age, has a sharp tongue. He is very quick and he calls out BS pretty quickly. I love the man, and I know he loves me, and that he'd be so happy to see me working on my Spanish even still. But he's not the one I'm gonna be practicing my conversations with. God love him, that man will point out everything that I say wrong, and he probably will not be the most tactful about it. 92-year-old men rarely are. Instead, I'm gonna use training wheels with myself as I develop my fluency in speech. This could be talking to a Spanish-speaking friend or my dad, or even just speaking to myself in the mirror or to my dog. Finding and designating a safe person to share your journey, someone who's gonna support you and encourage you and cheer you on, that's sometimes all the motivation you need to keep going when things feel tricky. And the final step that I'm taking to reclaim that part of my identity that I feel like I lost so long ago is embracing being a beginner. In this day and age, we're so about optimization and people who stand out and are amazing and good at something the second they begin. But I think that in glorifying that, we've lost sight of the beauty of starting from the beginning. that curiosity, that excitement, that buzz. Those things can still exist as you become an expert on a topic or a skill, but it's not the same as that brand new feel that you have at the start. You see this in relationships and in jobs and in hobbies. That honeymoon phase is beautiful and fun and exciting. So own it in this journey too. Something that I'm really carrying with me on this journey that I'm on is that being a beginner is not cringe. Being someone who's so afraid of failing that they don't start in the first place is cringe, because there's no reason for it. Failure, falling down, and learning from those experiences is the only way to success. The sooner we can drop our pride and our ego and accept that fact, the sooner we start intentionally crafting a life that we want. Being a beginner isn't a failure or a shortcoming. It's a beautiful opportunity to start writing a new chapter of your life in whatever language you choose. So now that I've shared the mindset shifts that I'm making to help me get over this mental block in my mind, I need your help. Again, I've got the Babbel membership. I've got a dad who literally speaks the language if I wanted to practice with him. Whether you grew up as a no sabo kid or you're a native speaker, or maybe there's something else, some other mental block that you've been able to jump over and you have some insights there, I would love to hear your experiences down in the comments below. So I'm gonna go practice my Spanish a little bit, but if you're still interested in hanging out, I think you're really gonna like the video that's on screen now. So I'll catch you over there, or I'll just see you next time. Until then, take care of yourselves. Bye guys.